Well, good afternoon, everyone. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the Tuesday, May the 9th, 2023 session in our series on entrepreneurship and Asian high-tech industries. I'm Richard Dasher. I direct the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center, which produces this series. And we want to say thank you to our member companies because it's their financial support of our center that allows us to put on this public program. And you probably know that the word free and public and Stanford are not often found in the same sentence. So we're delighted to have a panel today of some good contacts from years back and some brand new contacts coming to us really about the situation in the Philippines, but looking at what cross-Pacific investment, venture investment, and entrepreneurship is like in real life. So at the far end of the table is Ms. Minette Navarrete. And Minette is the co-founder and president of Kickstart Ventures, which is the corporate venture capital arm of Globe Telecom in the Philippines. But Minette has actually kind of spun the group out so that it is an independent legal entity at this point, right?
Yes.
Okay, and I'll let each of our panelists tell their own story in more detail than I can in just a minute. But sitting next to Minette is Joanne is the vice president in charge of investments for Kickstart Ventures. And before Kickstart, she was with LGT Venture Philanthropy, which is a Europe-based impact investment firm. So we'll ask her more about her story in a minute. And next to Joanne is David Liu, who is the co-founder and CEO of Clarity Movement. And we'll ask you to tell about Clarity in just a minute. And sitting closest to me is Ian Chan, who is the co-founder of CloserContact. And we'll find out more about CloserContact in just a minute. So let's kind of go in a fast round robin. And Minette, if you would share your story with people, I think that would be good. How did you get into this?
So somebody asked me last night if I always wanted to do venture capital. And the answer is it wasn't venture capital as much as innovation that I was interested in. I've historically been a corporate creature. I've worked in Unilever, in L'Oreal, and Levi Strauss, Shangri-La. And working in a telco, you realize that plain old telephone service has not changed for many, many years. And then it changed very, very fast in the last couple of decades. And so what drove me to spin out and start a company that was going to make venture capital investments was the realization that we were not going to invent everything inside the large corporation, and certainly not in a large telephone corporation. And the ability to make connections with amazing founders and startups, such as David and Ian, is what drove us 11 years ago to spin out of a telco and set up a venture capital firm.
Okay, so Joanne?
Hi, everyone. My name is Joanne. I work with Minette at Kickstart. As Professor Dasher mentioned, I started my career in impact investing and covering Southeast Asia for a European impact investing firm. I guess I've always been interested in kind of social development and bettering kind of the opportunity set for more people. And basically I've found investing in early stage companies, whether they be social enterprises or now venture-backed companies, is a fulfilling way to do that. And glad to be kind of here with you and look forward to share more later.
Okay, great. So David?
Yeah, I'm David Liu, co-founder and CEO of Clarity. And then at Clarity Movement, we provide accessible and actionable insights on air quality monitoring data sets all around the world. So we enable key stakeholders such as governments, industries, and the communities to take actions for environmental data.
David, where are you based?
I am based in San Diego, California,
Okay.
but originally the company is founded in Berkeley, California.
Okay. And do you have a connection to the Philippines?
Yes, we have actually, after our investment, we started our regional operations in Philippines, and we are expanding our business in Southeast Asia rapidly.
Right. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Dasher. My name's Ian. I originally grew up in Hong Kong. I'm a Stanford undergrad, class of 2014, international relations. And before starting Closer, I started my career off in management consulting, and I worked in-house at eBay and Stitch Fix, starting businesses within the bigger company, and decided to try to start my own. At Closer, we are primarily looking at two themes. Number one is that the fact that in a lot of emerging markets like the Philippines and whatnot, people rely on messaging for business communications as opposed to email in the US. And there just aren't a lot of good tools to help people be productive. And a lot of companies, especially, are losing insights that they're getting from their customers and their suppliers. And we just wanted to make life easier for individuals who are using this for their work and for companies to be more productive. I'm based here in the Bay Area, but one of our really good friends from the Philippines introduced us to Kickstart, and they've been great supporters of ours so far, and we've been trying to expand our markets into the Philippines.
Okay, great. So we've had some discussion of Southeast Asia in general before. So especially, Minette, Joanne, would you kind of tell a little bit about what people should know about the whole kind of innovation ecosystem of the Philippines?
Sure. Okay, so maybe fast facts about Southeast Asia and the Philippines, in case people don't know much about it. So Southeast Asia is about 600 million people. The Philippines is the second most populous country in the region. So we have about 110 million people. Innovation ecosystem. In 2012, when Kickstart began in the Philippines, founded by Minette and Dan, digital was kind of just starting in the Philippines. We had just started to see kind of smartphones come to the fore, mobile internet come to the fore. And Kickstart began with the mission of empowering or trying to encourage more Filipinos to start businesses, because in the Philippines, most people would want their kids to just get a job and go kind of the more stable route, right? Like, don't like start something. And so a lot of kind of the early work of Kickstart was encouraging more entrepreneurial activity. I joined Kickstart in 2016, and even then we were starting to see some signs of the ecosystem start to grow. But to be very honest with you, the Philippines only in the past 3 years has become kind of a more viable place for B2C companies to be built. So I used to call starting B2C companies in the Philippines the road to tears. And in 2020, when COVID hit, we had super tough lockdowns. And that's really what spurred a lot of the population to move online in a big way. So I'll give you a statistic. In 2019, GCash, which is like the mobile wallet in leading mobile wallet in the Philippines, it's like Venmo, I guess. We had only 20 million users on GCash at the end of 2019.
Having been launched in 2005.
So 14 years to get to 20 million. As of Q1 this year, GCash now has 75 million users. So it's like 3.5 to 4x increase in the number of Filipinos who can now make digital payments in our country. And I think that also indicates kind of the level of penetration of like e-commerce and things like that. So basically, it's kind of a super exciting time. It's been accelerating from when Kickstart started in 2012. COVID really threw gas on it, and you know,
Maybe just a quick comment on emerging markets in general. So Philippines, like many emerging markets, is in a bit of a leapfrog situation. It isn't going to be the same playbook that you see in the developed world. We used to say, and you know, this is still true today. In the Philippines, there are it's a population of 110 million people, 7 million credit cards, not credit card holders. So maybe 5 million credit card holders, 7 million credit cards, 35 million bank accounts, 75 million GCash users. The daily active user rate is very high. The monthly active user rate is very high. So I joke with my boss, my CEO manages by WhatsApp, not by email. But in the same fashion, fintech is not going through via banks and credit cards in the standard way in which it has evolved in the first world. It's just such a different development path. And that's exciting because it means all of you who have a desire to disrupt the way things are happening, the way things are being done, there's just great opportunity.
I think that's a great kind of kickoff on the Philippines. A lot of people probably don't know that there are a lot of software developers in the Philippines, and that the labor force there has surprisingly kind of useful skills for this kind of innovation ecosystem. But I want to jump in and ask David and Ian, how did you get involved with Kickstart? How did you first hear about them? Did they approach you? Did you approach them?
Yeah, for us, so one of our leading investors was already kind of a friend of them, and they have a co-investing in a couple of deals. And in our last round, we had a big target of global expansion, especially in the emerging market. For us, air pollution is a clear global issue, and we see the bigger market will be in the places has worse air pollution, unfortunately, and that's usually residing in fast developing countries such as Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand, and so on. Yeah.
So was it because of the investment that you kind of were active early in the Philippines?
Yes.
You already had some.
Yeah, we already had some. We actually had a project already running in Singapore,
Okay.
in Malaysia, in Indonesia, and we have seen the signals from the market they need the solutions. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. How about you? Actually, I think you two can share one mic, and you two can share one mic, and we'll be in a little bit better shape. I'm wired up, so.
Okay. This works? Okay. Yeah. I mean, pretty similar story as David. I think sometimes we would talk about like different cultures and working cultures. I think in Asia, right, we talk about being like a family. And I think we were introduced to Joanne, from a close friend from Stanford undergrad. And we weren't even thinking about the Philippines at the time, but like as we did a lot more research into the market size, the need, the companies that could potentially use our solution, it just made a lot of sense. And I think Kickstart also in particular, I think we were really excited of the approach you guys took. We're much more careful and diligent and kind of understanding the human aspect of entrepreneurship, as well as just the total addressable market or product market fit. And so I think that was a really helpful part. And I think the connection with Globe and Ayala had a very different perspective than other VCs that are pure investment arms.
Okay, so to our investors, let me throw out the question. How have things really been changing in these 3 years? Everybody's moved online, that's one change. But the theme of today, right, we were talking about cross-Pacific investing. Do you see that as really how much of an upward trend or a spike or what's going on?
I think from our statistics, certainly we see an upward trend. Some of it enabled by the fact that we are now so much more comfortable making investments where we've not been in the same room as the folks we're investing in. So we develop a different sense of doing diligence, which works on Zoom. And I think we're all getting comfortable working with each other, making investments, trusting.
Is this changing your expectations of what entrepreneurs will bring to the table? I mean, when Kickstart started, were you investing regionally outside the Philippines the whole time? Okay.
I would say, I mean, it's been a journey. Maybe like, I would say the first 2 years, 2012, 2013, a lot of it was about like seeding the local startup ecosystem, and investments outside the Philippines were more kind of outside of the norm. But over the years, I think we've done more investments, first venturing outside of the Philippines to around Southeast Asia, and then even further out, Canada, the US, Israel, because the thesis for our fund, right, is we want to find innovation where it is in the world and as it's relevant to our market, our country. What we offer as a CVC is a platform, right? Ayala Corporation, again, for those who may not know, Ayala Corporation in the Philippines spans many different industries. All the listed entities of Ayala Group make up about 14% of the Philippine Stock Exchange Index. Total group revenues of Ayala make up about 2 to 2.5% of Philippine GDP. And across Southeast Asia, that is common, right? That large corporations have an outsized role, I guess, to play.
These big family groups, because it's not just one company; it's many companies.
Absolutely,
Ayala Group.
Absolutely.
In fact, I was going to say across Asia, you will see this in Japan, in Korea, in Indonesia, Vietnam, Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, everywhere. The roots are in a family business that has expanded. In some countries, they're very deep vertically within a particular industry and they're dominant there. In others, like the Philippines, they will go across many industries. So the group that we are part of was the first business house in the Philippines. It's 189 years old. The current leadership is the 7th generation, and we are just seeing the 8th generation come into the company. And that's interesting because the 8th generation, they are millennial and Gen Z. They are digital natives. The risk appetite is different. The familiarity with tech is different. And I think perhaps, Richard, to your point, there is some change within the company that makes it better able to relate to founders.
Well, I think all of us are kind of moving into a digitally interconnected world. And that's part of it. But before you go on, Joanne, I know you've got a comment, but I want to ask our entrepreneurs, if you're working at a distance, how do you establish the kind of proof of commitment to the local market that you really need to have, especially, I think, in a developing country, where they tend to look at people as being sort of high-handed and so forth if you're on the outside?
I think for us, having local presence is very important. We hire locally. We making sure that we have folks there that can meet the clients, support the projects. I think that's show commitment, and I think that also give us the advantage over competitors that may selling through a distributor or something like that. Yeah.
So, really having a local presence.
Yeah, I
don't have the problem of managing remote groups.
Well, our whole company is remote.
Okay.
So that's make it easier. We still have to have the pain of time zone, but that's something we have learned to overcome. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, similarly. I mean, I think it's also hiring thoughtfully, right? I think like we started off with a lot of our engineering team in Hong Kong. That's where we're based, and recently with kind of the support, we're like, oh, let's explore kind of talent in the Philippines. And some folks were like, oh, you can just like get a quick team of like developers that are like off the shelf and whatnot. And we're like, no, actually, that's not the right way to do it. Let's actually interview each person, try to think what their professional development path is. And then I think finding local champions in your customers. I think that's actually a very important part. Like let the customers do their own champion and advocating of you, and they give you the feedback of what works for their market.
All great points. Joanne, I didn't mean to stop you. Go ahead.
No, not at all. I just wanted to just say on the cross-specific kind of investments. So the first point I wanted to make, right, is that firms, not just Kickstart out of the Philippines, but many, particularly CVCs across Southeast Asia, are venturing out of our region to look for innovation, investments, partnership opportunities in the US and other countries where the innovation is to bring back into our market and use kind of our kind of corporations as a platform for that innovation to reach like everyday people. The other thing that I've seen also over the last 3 years is there is more capital from the US and other global investment firms coming into investment opportunities in the Philippines. So just last year, for example, the Philippines recorded something like $1 billion in capital going in to fund venture companies in the country, which is a big deal. Like 5 years ago, I think we would have barely been at like 100 million. So it's a super big increase over a short amount of time. And that's because I guess capital also is looking for good opportunities to allocate and where the growth is. So in 2022 or somewhere in that period, 2020 to 2022, we saw General Atlantic come in, KKR come in, Tiger Global come in, Sequoia, Andreessen Horowitz. So let's say it goes both ways, I guess is what I wanted to say.
So let me kind of ask the kind of deep secret question for the investor side. Once the foreign investors come in, what happens to the startup valuations?
I mean, mass hysteria ensued in 2021. Certainly,
2021 was such a
it's
spike year.
nuts.
Yeah.
It's nuts. So definitely, like, so listen, we benefited from those marks,
Yeah.
I guess, right? But I think overall, like for the ecosystem, we still think it's a positive, right? In the sense that local capital can only take like companies so far. And then, if they want to go regional or even global, you need kind of hundreds of millions of dollars of funding. And it's great to have then kind of your soft banks and, your KKRs, et cetera, to come and support.
Are you finding yourselves syndicating with a lot of foreign investors in most of your investments now, or?
Wouldn't say most, but in many investment rounds, certainly the big foreign investors want the comfort of a credible local
Yep.
investor.
Yeah.
So I think it works both ways.
Okay. So for the entrepreneur side, was this mass hysteria in 2021? What happens in terms of having to deal with investors who may not know what you're facing on the ground?
I'll start, I guess. My co-founder and I started closer to last year. So we did skip a little bit the hysteria in 2021, but we do have some peers who went through that and are actually hitting some harder waters now. But I think like for us, and I think like today's theme was cross-Pacific, and I think like the other partners we have on our investor list is a fund that's from Chile, a fund that's based primarily in Indonesia and Japan, as well as another Filipino fund. So like I mean the willingness willingness of investors to collaborate across borders, especially amongst emerging markets, we saw was a huge benefit because there were a lot of cross learnings and a lot of similarities in the markets that each investor brought to bear.
Anything on that to add to that, David?
I think it's pretty similar. I think for us, it's our investor, if anything, pushing us to funding non-US investors because we want value more than just a name. For us, having the local knowledge and the support from a group like Ayala is crucial for us in terms of regional expansions. And for the folks who work in the Southeast Asia region, this type of family business is pretty dominant in the market in a way. So having their back is make a huge difference. Yeah.
So I think that one of the kind of issues is that if you're trying to do business in, quote, Southeast Asia even, it's a huge number of people, but how many different languages, how many different political systems, how many different kind of cultures do you have to deal with? Have you found recently that to be a big challenge, or is it something you kind of expected? This is for our two entrepreneurs.
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, but that's also the opportunity, right? I think especially in the post-COVID world, you find that, if this doesn't work for Singapore, let's try Indonesia. If this doesn't work there, let's try the Philippines, right? There's a lot more variation and opportunity by trying each one. But yes, I think every country has slightly different infrastructure. So our business is in the messaging space. In the Philippines, they use both WhatsApp and Viber. It's another platform. In other countries, they use Line, right? So even in the technology platforms, there's a different thing in addition to language, but I think it's also an opportunity.
So one of your distinctive features is you're able to kind of integrate these different platforms to make it easier for people to do advertising on them and really monetize them, right?
Yes, I think, and a lot of it isn't, in the roadmap.
Yeah. So is that something that gives you kind of an advantage over somebody like Apple or Google or whoever who might, have 300 engineers they could throw to this project easily?
Well, I think there's definitely a nimbleness in being a startup that is closer to the markets. And I think I've been in California and Silicon Valley for a while now. And it's interesting, you talk to your friends who work at Meta or Google, and at the end of the day, no matter how global a company is, it's still very much a Silicon Valley company and focusing on developing products that work first for the US and maybe Europe. And then they think about Southeast Asia and Latin America eventually.
Yeah. Under rest of world. Yeah.
So I think we flipped the playbook a little bit there in terms of how we think about development.
Yeah, yeah. And David, your company is really has to do with, I would say, climate tech.
Yeah.
Do you find that the attitudes in the markets you're in Asia are actually forward looking? Are these really good markets because people are hungrier for that? It's less politicized, maybe. I don't mean to lead you on, but what's it like?
It's actually quite different country to country, but I would say in the area we're in around air pollution, it's much less politicized all across the world. It has been a increasing, publicly acknowledged issues that's just doesn't need debate anymore. So I think if anything, we see increasing awareness across the globe, especially in Southeast Asia, around the demands of cleaner air amid all these rapid developments.
And go ahead, Joan.
I just wanted to say on kind of the Southeast Asian opportunity, I guess, and US companies and things like that. So we invested in a company called Zendit. They're kind of split between Indonesia and the Philippines. They're probably one of the largest payment gateways in the region. So much so that, in our IM, we were like, Stripe of Southeast Asia. And a lot of our due diligence when we were looking at Zendit, for example, was like, why wouldn't Stripe just do this, right? Stripe's already in Singapore. But to Ian's point, like, and the founders of Xander were saying, well, Stripe's been in the region for 5 years, but they've not really prioritized it. They've not really built much out, right? They're just kind of in Singapore, not doing much aggressively for the rest of the region. And anyway, while they're not doing it, like, we will be in the market and we will execute and we will build. And they've built a tremendously valuable company. It's a unicorn several times over. And I guess that's the thing, right? Is that while of course the opportunity in the US is tremendous, in Europe, the developed markets, it is an equally large opportunity, I think, that exists in Southeast Asia, and a lot of big companies are sleeping on it, in that they have other priorities. And if you say, like, hey, but Southeast Asia needs a Stripe too, right? Southeast Asia needs a DoorDash, whatever, right? And if you want to take it on, right, and build blank for Southeast Asia, you build a tremendously valuable company.
So for the investor side, how do you handle the whole question of trust, investing it remotely, but also partnering with other investors remotely? Because whoever takes the lead is responsible for the majority of the due diligence. I mean, everybody has to do their own due diligence. But do you find that there are new tools that are making this easier, or how are you dealing with that challenge?
We're a little bit old school. Somebody counted the questions we ask in diligence, and I'm told we ask 83 questions.
Asking questions is good.
But I find that it's necessary.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing to remember, and we always remind founders of this, is that due diligence works both ways. And in the same way that we learn about founders, they learn about us. They have the opportunity to ask us questions. We have, I think, everything changes. Business model, technology, price points, everything changes. The people usually don't change. And so one of the things we do look for is alignment across values. We have walked away from companies that will probably do quite well. But if we think these are not the people we would trust, to your point, to do the right thing when left alone, then perhaps that's not necessarily the kind of company we want to invest in. We, as venture capital firms, we take minority stakes. We do not control companies. We have to trust. And so the alignment across values means that we are able to be supportive. And when you look at the Philippines, you have to cast your eyes back to 1946 in the US. We did not have a venture capital industry. We still don't. It's, most of the venture capital funding is coming from conglomerates. So this is not like Silicon Valley 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. This is maybe as 50 years ago at best. So there's quite a lot of norming and forming that still needs to happen. And so from our perspective, the building of trust and building of processes and systems is absolutely critical if we want something that lasts.
Okay. I've got a couple of other questions for the investor side, and starting to get questions, and some of the first questions I'm getting will go to the entrepreneur side. So next question for you is kind of jumping back to this sort of the prevalence of the gigantic family business groups in Asia, which is distinctive. You go to Thailand and one family business group will have like 1/5 of the commercial real estate property. Do you find that it used to be so-and-so is big, like Ayala is big in the Philippines, right? Certain group would be big in Thailand, certain groups would be big in Japan and Korea. Are you seeing kind of, especially not so much Japan and Korea, which have had global businesses for some time, but among the other family business groups, are you seeing more kind of market expansion, cross-border market expansion? Are they running into each other more, or are they really kind of cooperating to kind of as they go along?
Yes, I think for the most part, the conglomerates try for local dominance. I should say that we are seeing more expansion outside local shores and very frequently partnerships.
Mhm. Okay. So my last question before we kind of start to move in, and we will ask you to use a microphone. So we may have to take one of these mics when we move to audience questions in just a minute. But we'd love to have your questions and comments. So please be ready. So what about the downturn and high inflation? If you look at some of the macroeconomic numbers, it looks like GDP growth will almost keep up with inflation in developing Asia, not for the advanced economies, but that kind of makes you really an object of considerable interest by an awful lot of people. How do you see that playing out? Are we coming out of the whole COVID kind of mess, and will it settle down in a year or two, or do you think we're really going to have even pressure for higher inflation?
I mean, listen, I think inflation is an issue, certainly that we grapple with in the Philippines. We import uh, too much of our food, if you ask me, and inflation, at some points can be as high as like 7%, 8%. However, our economic growth is also about
Around
that.
there, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, while of course it's something that affects the everyday Filipino, overwhelmingly, when I think about our country and the opportunity coming out of COVID, I'm still very optimistic about it. So I told you guys earlier about how B2C in the Philippines is no longer the road to tears. There's so much still to be built, despite there now being 75 million GCash users. E-commerce penetration in the Philippines is only at 4%, right? Right? Where is the US now? Maybe 25%, right? So it's there's still so much to be built. And what I always say to people is our developing countries, our country and others, there's a lot of inefficiency in developing countries. There's a lot of infrastructure that doesn't work. But where the inefficiency is, where the pain is, that's where the opportunity is. That's where you can build stuff to make it better. And so if I take inefficiency as the barometer for how much opportunity there is, like wow guys.
Plenty of opportunity. I think also a couple of things. When you're in Asia and you look at where economies have grown, a couple of interesting things. First, GDP per capita $4,000 to $8,000 is kind of the per capita GDP where you're looking at the opportunity for a real consumer market, for real investments. Philippines and Indonesia, the two largest Southeast Asian countries, those economies are just at the cusp of the $4,000. So we believe there's going to be some good growth there. The other thing is when you look at the 15 to 35-year-old age range, because 15 to 35 years old, when I talk to banks, when I talk to consumer companies, these are the people who are going to consume, who are going to get jobs, start businesses, open bank accounts, take loans. The 15 to 35 age range in Southeast Asia is still growing. It's probably going to peak in Indonesia, maybe 2030, before it starts to sort of taper down.
And this is, of course, very different from other
And this
Northern
is-
Asian markets where the population is aging pretty rapidly.
Yes. So when you think about the 15 to 35 age range, that was Japan in maybe the 70s. That was Korea in the 90s. That was China 2010, 2015, before it starts to sort of taper down. In the Philippines, the 15 to 35-year-old age range, that's going to keep growing until 2055. So the opportunity for a market for both B2C as well as B2B is still growing over quite a number of years.
Absolutely. Kind of shifting back to the cross-Pacific and cross-border kind of expansion. Could both of you tell, and this picks up Veda Shree's question that came in by Zoom, okay, about how you develop the markets, how did you get started? There's, of course, the technology development phase, but when you actually start rolling this out to markets, can you give more details about how you picked this market and then how you picked the next market and how you actually did it?
I mean, we're still in the process of doing that, so take a grain of salt. But for us, it's very important to have kind of flagship projects to be established. Tell a success story.
For you, what's a flagship project?
For me, it's the project with Singapore.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say Singapore has, kind of, it's an interesting country, kind of a developed country in
The Switzerland of Southeast Asia.
yeah, pretty much.
Can I ask another question, follow up on Singapore? The Singapore government has really been pushing climate tech.
Yep.
Was that a benefit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There's a robust demand there. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, you did the flagship project in Singapore.
Yep.
And pretty much that was your entire effort at that time, go to market effort, or
At first, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we can use that as a reference, starting to, because Singapore is just Singapore. There's no other places to expand. But then you can really use that as a reference.
Actually, I have to confess, as somebody who's been watching for a long time, flagship projects in Singapore have been very successful method for people to use for a long time. If you could get Singtel to be involved in something in the communications area, you had a good global pathway already. So, okay. How about you, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, we're even earlier stage than David here. But I think sort of you work with a flagship, but instead of kind of maybe the big flashy one, it's actually the customer that is the most vocal about wanting your product. They're like, we wanted this built yesterday, we want to use it now. And then let that customer kind of be the one that you can then go to other
So
customers.
just to be clear, the customers are businesses that want to have their presence in these message.
Yeah, it's basically how to make their sales forces more productive,
Right.
how to turn them into insights, how to do better there.
So kind of retailers are a big.
Actually, B2B companies.
B2B
So software providers. So actually, one of our partners is another company in the Kickstart portfolio. They sell a software to restaurants in the Philippines,
Okay.
and they have been sort of experienced a huge boom during the pandemic. And they're trying to catch up, right? There's a lot of inefficiency, as Joanne was saying. Instead of adding an army of of people, can they think about processes and tools to help them be a lot more efficient? And we came in to try to help them do that.
Okay. So we'd like to open the floor to questions. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and we have to give up one of our mics, I'm afraid. Questions from anybody? And yeah. Oh, I see you, and way back in the back too.
So hi, I'm Sarvesh here. I have also worked as a VC, and I was a mentor to one of the healthcare projects, Philippines focused healthcare projects in Harvard Medical School. So I know that the healthcare system is somewhat different from here, and it's facing many challenges. So how do you see the healthcare investments, the future of healthcare investments in the near future?
Probably Minette and Joanne.
I mean, so again, speaking of the platform that a group like Ayala has or is building, 5 years ago, 5 to 7 years ago, Ayala decided to go into healthcare. Um, yeah, and when a group like Ayala does it, like they start to build up a bunch of assets. So we started with a generics pharmacy, acquiring that. Then we started building a chain of primary care clinics. Then we're building hospitals. I think this year we will open the first cancer hospital in the Philippines. On top of that, then you build telemedicine and EMR, and basically a healthcare super app, right? So that's a platform that the group is building and putting corporate assets behind. For us, as we think about making venture capital investments in the healthcare space, we think about how it can plug into, right, that is already being built. And so whether it's digital tests that can be built into the app, or kind of technologies that can bring down the cost of care or monitoring for at the clinic or hospital level. But I guess we think in synergies.
Yeah, Philippines, like many emerging markets, is underinvested, undercapacitated in healthcare. And because we are the population so fragmented, so spread out, it means many people will be born and will die with never having met a medical professional. So the ability to offer remote service one way or another, and to put them in touch with real doctors, real nurses, real pharmacists, is a significant game changer for healthcare. We see more investment going in, both in terms of large conglomerates making investments in the established traditional healthcare ecosystem, as well as a number of startups trying to solve the problem.
Okay, thank you. I saw a request way back in the back. Yep, go for it.
Hello.
Hi.
This is Karthik from Japan. I have a two-part question. Part one is on the public policy side, which is if you look at countries like Japan, the law there legally prevents Japanese venture capital funds or corporate venture capital funds to not invest more than 50% outside of Japan. So they're like, you have to put 50% of the portfolio in Japan and the rest can be outside. Now they're getting rid of that rule. How's the situation in the Philippines? Like, are you allowed to invest only in the Philippines, or are you allowed to divest outside the Philippines? The reason I asked this question is in part two, because I represent a $220 million VC fund based in Japan. And we're also planning to expand into like the emerging markets. We already have a footprint in India, but we're looking at Southeast Asia very actively. And would you be open to co-investing with us? A shameless sales plug-in. Apologies for that. Apologies for that. So the question's open. Would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Sure. Well, so before I joined Kickstart, I worked for 10 months for the Philippine government developing their startup policies. So I guess I have some experience in the matter. There are no restrictions for capital allocation outside. So for Kickstart, we go where the opportunity is. If we find a good local opportunity, we'll invest. If we find a good opportunity outside, we'll invest. So there are no restrictions in that way. I thought actually where your question was going is kind of foreign investment restrictions, ownership, things like that. Generally, it's pretty liberal, right? Like I think there are some thresholds you need to meet for especially like retail trade, things like that. But it generally hasn't been a hindrance to us in any of our investments and getting foreign capital to invest in the country. And then to your second question, yes, let's talk.
We'll do more offline. For the entrepreneurs, the whole issue of government regulation and governments being slow, how do you deal with that?
I'm volunteering to talk because our 60% of customers government. I have to admit it's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a challenge, but for us, it's kind of a broader challenge of kind of our product in general. What we see is that in emerging market like this, you have to do a lot more educations to the governments to let them be comfortable with more cutting edge technology. And then in the meantime, you're almost developing the market as you are entering into the market as well.
So I think that this actually goes back to the very first question that I asked, or one of the first questions that I asked, about showing that you're serious commitment to the local market. And certainly going in and being a good corporate citizen is a part of that. It takes effort.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons that it used to be companies were told not to try to expand internationally until they had a certain amount of revenue and so forth, because the founders just couldn't deal with it until that point. But it's interesting to see the pressure of opportunity to be engaged at much earlier stages of the company than before. Does this seem to be what the two of you are doing? Does it seem to be really different from all the other entrepreneurs you know? Are you really unusual animals for doing this, or is this really kind of a community that's growing?
Time would tell whether it's a good strategy. I mean, I spend quite a lot of time at the GSB as well, and we have students from all across the world, and you often share stories about what businesses and what ideas could work in each country. And I think you're just naturally interested in potentially going to try it out in different countries. And especially in the post-COVID world, I would never have dreamt that of our 6 investors, I literally met actually 3 of them in the last 2 weeks for the first time in person, and Minette and Joan for the first time meeting in person. And so I think it's also the opportunity that has come about in the last 3 years that probably would not have been possible in the past. So that's why.
It's interesting when technology enables something, it kind of pushes people to do it. Questions from the audience? And I see down here the mic is already back there. We'll give it.
My name is Abi. I work for Goldman Sachs in the wealth management division. So my question is for the investors. When you invest in a startup or a business, do you consider the potential of the founders more, or the quality of the idea, or what mix of factors do you consider?
I think the quality of the founder is always important. Like I said, we would walk away if we thought the founder was not someone to be trusted. But it also depends on every stage, because at seed stage, there is no data. There's very little diligence you run. So what you're looking at seed stage is quite different from when it's Series A or Series B or Series C. The questions we ask, the data we seek will be different at each stage.
This is VC Central, so this probably you guys already all know, but I heard it from a very smart VC, not me, but someone said to me, we look at 3 T's, right? Team, TAM, timing. And I think timing for me has been maybe the biggest lesson. I mentioned to you, right? Before 2020, road to tears. So when you start something is important because it spells the difference of a tailwind or a headwind, right? TAM is important. So it's not just
everybody total addressable market if you're not into this.
Oh,
okay.
Thank you.
The market size, yeah.
The market size is important. It's not so much the solution itself, because the solution can change. Like 10 different times. So really, is the market big enough, and is the founder right? Like, because you have to stick with it, right? You have to stick with it through like all the evolutions of the thing. So whatever it was you got pitched at the start, man, like it is hard. Usually, never that by like right 2 years down, you're like, what? What did I invest in? Right, but that to Minette's point, right? We invested in them, right? And yeah, when businesses kind of not fail, but whatever, they close, right? It's actually sometimes because the founders like I don't know anymore, right? What you're betting on is their ability to iterate, just figure it out, and the market has to be there. So that's why timing.
Thank you. Our next one comes from down front. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex, and I used to study in Columbia, so high West Coast, and now I work for Tencent in China, so a conglomerate. And my question is really related to like technology and communications. So I'm thinking about like I want to ask about like ask founders and like your ask Minette and I'm sorry, Joanne. And I just want to have some few questions about like conflicts to handle with like government relationships, because, you know, in China, it's such a big topic. So when investors, they kind of help companies to entering like global markets, especially in markets like China or Singapore, you know, handling government relations is such a big topic. I saw Tesla having such, you know, they actually did a great job working with the government, but I saw some like really bad cases. For example, for Amazon, they had a really terrible experience, you know, trying to have the global integration with local market. So I just want to know, and sometimes just an adding point, like value conflicts is also a really great topic because, for example, the user data, like the protection policy, and sometimes, you know, just different values for users, they really, you know, become such a great conflicts. And just want to ask like how like VC firms and founders, you kind of handle the crisis and like the conflicts here. Thank you.
So you've got a lot of the challenges that are involved.
Yeah, I know. It's such a
new
big
business
challenge.
Development involved.
I have a quick high level answer, which is in Southeast Asia, many of the governments have programs specifically to support investors and to support founders. So whether it is Singapore and the National Research Institute, or Enterprise Singapore, or Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, we do see that the governments are very keen to support. So from our perspective, we have not had the experience of conflicts with government.
Our answer is pretty simple. We chose not to go to China. And that's because we're not really a B2B and B2C dominant. We are B2G dominant, and doing business with government directly in China is completely different from like opening Tesla, for example. So for us, we consciously chose not to do so. It's just too much headache, especially given our current stage.
You chose not to do B2G, or you chose not to do
B2G in China.
In China, okay.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we chose to avoid them.
Yeah, okay.
Market, actually, completely.
Yeah. Okay. So in this regard, though, I'm kind of curious how you see the situation with China changing the kind of mood in the region. Does this bring in more opportunity for Southeast Asia, or are people kind of wondering whether China's going to win out or America's going to win out?
Well, I mean, just to add to your question, I think the first thing is we don't see, like in the Philippines and I would say across Southeast Asia, we don't see so many Southeast Asian companies looking to enter the Chinese market. Usually it's the opposite. So you'll have Chinese companies and Alibaba, Tencent, looked at TikTok. My God, ByteDance. Oh my God. Do you know that TikTok is now 10% of e-commerce in the Philippines? Yeah, dude, they started 2 years ago. Yeah, people don't mess around, right? Anyway, so like so it's actually more China coming out to Southeast Asia, and then usually how they do it is they will not acquire or take a large minority stake in an existing e-commerce platform, existing mobile wallet, etc. Tencent is invested in Paymaya, which is a mobile wallet in the Philippines and digital bank. So yeah, that's I guess. And then
I have one comment that I'd like to add.
Please.
But yeah, basically also look at some of the really huge scale projects that can't happen without sort of government backing. Smart city projects are a great example that involve multiple supply chains, multiple kind of technology needs, all of which are emerging. And so I think that unlike a lot of areas where government protectionism protects industries that they start to see as their national champions already, with something like the smart cities, you don't quite see the existing stakeholders in quite such a strong position. And they may offer lots of opportunities in foreign markets.
And then I guess on what you were saying, kind of geopolitics and how is Southeast Asia kind of feeling about all of it, or what's happening here. So again, just speaking from Southeast Asia, what we've noticed, right, is some Chinese entrepreneurs are moving out of China because of I don't know, fear, concerns of regulation. Like if they get too big, maybe the Chinese government will shut them down. So I think more Chinese entrepreneurs are leaving China and going to other parts of Singapore or whatever, and starting businesses there. So I would say kind of so more talent, entrepreneurial talent is moving out of China into Southeast Asia. And then the other thing that we observe is because of the same concerns, some investors who like global investors, who were very focused on China, are now diversifying out of China and investing also in Southeast Asia and India. So I guess we're a net beneficiary of the concerns.
We'll say though, so I used to go to China before COVID several times a year. It is an awesome tech community, and quite a lot of venture capital firms. So it feels to me very much like there is such a lot of innovation, it's such a lot of talent, and quite a lot of intensity in terms of investing. Certainly, funds like the Zen Fund, et cetera, et cetera. I think China will continue to be quite strong, and both government as well as private investors in China will continue to fuel the innovation ecosystem, particularly in tech in China.
Okay, thank you. Question from up here.
Yeah, my name is Joan, and I'm a regular undergrad here. My question is just like, I'm just trying to go back to something you were saying earlier about the trusted founder thing. I feel like most VCs nowadays, they usually just put this out there that we really want to work with someone who's trusted, we can actually trust. But I feel like the word trust could be really deep, but when they just put it out there, it feels really shallow. So I feel like I just want to know when VCs you guys say stuff that they want, the first thing that they're looking for is someone that can be trusted. Are you guys referring to someone that can perfectly fit in your portfolio, or are you looking for something more deeper than that? Because if we really think about it, most big ideas nowadays are coming from people that are really not that you can't really trust. So can you go a little bit deeper in like what you mean by like trusted people?
I think that's a great question. I will say one thing because I've recently become a partner in a VC fund. And what the kind of establishment of trust in our case involves asking an incredible large amount of questions that if I was a founder, I'd be really ticked off at. And yet you see how these people come back with it. And do they have good answers? Will they admit it when they don't know something, right? Do they seem to have the flexibility because as business models have to change? You know, do they show some sort of flexibility where they're going to keep up and keep watching to see how to make sure they're maximizing the opportunity of the company? So a lot of it is really observation based. Whereas, you know, at the end of the day, I think people say trust because it's an incomplete data set. And it will always be an incomplete data set. Anything about innovation is an incomplete data set because it hasn't happened yet. And I think that, you know, to be very frank, in a lot of cases, there have been prejudices, there have been assumptions made, both positive and negative. Somebody went to the same university I did, right? So, oh yeah, I'm going to invest in you. That's not a great idea. And, you know, that kind of thing, where it's worked against groups of people. And we see that in men-women thing, right?
I was
The
going to say,
male-female diversity, that's an issue there. How do you establish the trust? The one thing that I would say is from my own experience, it is a pretty intensive process where it's not just one set of questions, it on goes, this whole due diligence thing. And I do think that the VCs here work pretty fast. But the ones in Asia are, you're looking at several months of pretty intense discussions.
yes, I can see Ian's. We can step out and you can tell them. No, but you know, it's a great question. I want to remind everyone that trust is both ways, meaning they have to trust us as well. And so over the period where we're asking each other questions, etc., trust is built. We look for consistency between what they say and what they do. We will frequently have reference calls. We will look at various data points. And some of it is frankly gut. If you meet hundreds of people every year, at some point you begin to get a feel for who you think. I mean, it's the same way you build friendships. Which friends do you trust? Which friends do you not? And some of it is frankly gut.
Yeah, I think one anecdote I sort of, when we were fundraising, I think we sort of spoke to a lot of VCs, right? And plenty will say no, and some will kind of lead you on. But I think one thing during the Kickstart process, like in addition to the 83 questions, which some of it, right, we just had to say, don't have an answer now. We'll come back to you next round, hopefully. And then I remember it was stuck with me a lot, right? The last meeting is with Minette after you've gone through all those stages, and my co-founder and I were sort of prepping, staying up all night, looked through what the TAM numbers were, what our sources were, and what we could potentially pitch, and we had all these slides. And then the whole hour conversation, Minette just asked us about our personal journeys and stories and our values and kind of why we were doing this together or why we were, and that was very different to a lot of the other VCs we spoke to, and I think.
So that helps the trust.
I think it's both ways. Yeah, I think it shows that there's a care for the human and the founder more than just another number.
Yeah.
So
I have a follow-up here from our good friend Paulo in Brazil. It's good to see that Paulo's back with us on Zoom.
Hi, Paulo.
One of you told us that due diligence is a two-way process based on trust. I agree with that. However, when a private equity fund intends to acquire a controlling stake in your company, the fund denies you to check with other companies invested by them, won't let you check other companies that they've bought into. When they, while they spend months checking on the depths of your technology and accounts, They don't let you check on them. Is this the current procedure in these funds?
No. Hi, Paolo. No. The ecosystem in the Philippines is very small, right? As Minette said, and we've shared. So, we've made maybe close to 40 investments in the Philippines, and they all talk. They all talk. Even before we talk to them, they've talked to each other about us. And I think if we were shitty investors, like if we leak their information, if we let people down, if we cheated them in some way, like the word gets around, and then they wouldn't want to work with you anymore. People have options, right? Can I on the trust thing? Can I share, like, I wanted to share with you like a couple of stories. I'll try to keep it super short, of when I said no, right? So I agree with what you said. A lot of it is observational. It's in the interactions with people, and sometimes it's in the things they say by accident. It's not even in the Q&A. So, like, I remember I was talking to a founder, and we'd finished kind of talking about his business, and he was just telling me about whatever, his life. And then for some reason, he decided the story he wanted to share with me was he had been on the beach, he'd gotten injured, he had to go to the hospital, and then he got a medical bill. And then he was like, yeah, well, I just wanted to check. I just wanted to try. I asked my graphic designer to add a number. I don't know why he shared it. I really don't. I asked my graphic designer to just add a number on this thing, and I sent it to my insurer to see if they would notice, and they didn't. And hey, I got more money. I was like, hello, right? I cannot make this stuff up. This really happened, right? So I mean, clearly. Right?
That one did not reach me.
Another one. I was in a meeting with the founder. It was going fine. But it was a funny meeting because they say, like, I'm the founder, just talking. And the rest of the team was around, but none of them were talking. Like, they were waiting, like, they would only talk if he said, like, talk. But otherwise, they were very quiet. And then his battery on his laptop it died, or it was gonna die. And someone from the team came, brought a charger over, plugged it in, and like MagSafed it to his laptop. And he kept talking. He didn't acknowledge her. He didn't say thank you. Like, he just kept going. Like, it was like completely normal. And I was like, huh? This is so weird, right? Like, so you can't put a finger on it, right? But there's stuff that happens when you are in conversation with someone for 3-4 hours at a time, and you notice, and you're like, this seems off, right? Like, I'm not sure that I would want to work with someone who acts like this. And yeah, it goes both ways. I'm sure that you've had conversations with VCs when, right? And usually it's something, right? It's like, it's a question they asked. It's just
Small thing.
and that's what triggers it for you. You're like, no, right? Like, I cannot spend, like, because right from seed investment to exit is what, 13 years on average? Can you imagine? So it's a long time, right?
So for everybody, the title of this session is Cross-Pacific Investing in Entrepreneurship in Real Life. I think you've just heard the in real life part of this. Time for maybe two more questions. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jacqueline. I'm a fourth year and co-chair master's student here. I have a question for the founders. I was wondering, you talked about the opportunities to be found in the variation in culture and language across Southeast Asia. I'm just wondering if you could talk about some challenges that you faced personally in creating a product that at its foundation is generalizable enough for the Southeast Asia market, yet also specific enough for each country's individual markets.
So for us, we have the benefits of we are in a way, kind of a measuring of fundamental scientific, like properties. So it's kind of a global in a way. Our challenge facing is the languages, in terms of the marketing materials, in terms of, and then I think on that part, we learn to be able to find trusted local partners to help us distribute, translate, and expand. Yeah. And I think given our resources, it's probably the most efficient way you can do to kind of addressing this variety of market. If you're trying to do everything yourself, you're not going to do it well.
So I guess it's also recognizing what you're trying to solve as a company. I think it's figuring out what the common theme is, which for us, it's companies whose sales forces rely on a messaging platform to do most of their sales. That pain point is cross-border. Now, what is not cross-border is which platform you use in the country, which language you speak. And so you just have to invest in those tools and development in order to do that. But I will say, like, kind of my co-founder and I debate this quite a lot. Do we try to go to all the countries at once, one country, really go and grow it first? And there's no right answer, but I think the focus, being focused as a company and making sure you have a strong business case first before expanding to everywhere is probably the best.
Okay. Great question. One more question.
Thank you. So I recently started a company and we're trying to raise around like money. But the question I have is people, I naturally go to the VCs that specialize in this vertical, had invested in this before. But I also had the concern, what if what I said becomes the institutional knowledge and it gets spread to my so-called competitors? Like, how do I correctly protect it, but also get in like the interested parties?
That's for our investor side, for sure.
Yeah, great question. One of the things I have always said is there is no single deal that is more important and bigger than all my future deals. And so if anybody's specific piece of information is spread to their competitors, you can guarantee we will never get a good deal. The only companies that will come pitch to us will be the ones who cannot find funding from anyone else. And so for us, we safeguard our reputation very fiercely. This means...
Follow up on that. Do you use written NDAs with the companies before you invest in them? Before you invest, during the process. Very few VCs do, right? But I think that that's a good indication that the VCs know that if they step out of line, they're really going to suffer over the long term. Yeah. So what a great, insights from people on the front line and seeing an exciting part of the world that really is kind of driving world economic growth for the next few years. And I, want to thank everybody for coming. But please join me in thanking our panel. Great time.